Twin sisters vanished during their night shift, but 12 years later, a security guard checks old footage and makes a shocking discovery. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Frank Miller stared at his reflection in the hospital locker room mirror, noting the gray hair that had replaced what was once dark brown 12 years ago. Lines etched across his face like geographical markers of a journey through guilt and regret. His weathered blue eyes held the same haunted look they'd acquired the night Emma and Olivia Reynolds disappeared during his shift. 12 years. 12 years of second-guessing, of searching for answers, of walking these same sterile corridors, wondering if he could have prevented whatever happened to those bright young nursing students. The weight of that night had transformed from acute anguish to a dull, persistent ache that never truly subsided. Frank closed his locker, the familiar creak of rusted metal, a constant in his ever-changing world. Through the small window in the door, he caught sight of Jessica Reynolds walking down the hallway, her posture impeccable, her steps measured and precise. The administrative director of Lakeside Memorial Hospital carried herself with the carefully constructed composure of someone who had rebuilt her life from tragedy. Gone was the broken young woman who had pleaded with police and hospital staff to find her twin sisters. In her place stood a consummate professional whose eyes still carried shadows of that same pain Frank saw in his own reflection. They were both still here, Frank thought, like two ghosts haunting the scene of their greatest failure, unable to leave until some resolution was found. But with his retirement just a month away, it seemed increasingly unlikely that closure would ever come. Miller, the gruff voice of Carter, the head of security, interrupted Frank's reverie. Director wants you to sort through the old archive files in the basement before you leave us for good. Says you're the only one who knows that ancient filing system. Frank nodded, swallowing his irritation. At 62, he was being treated as an artifact himself, a relic from another era of the hospital's history. I'll get started this afternoon, he replied, gathering his things. Perhaps it was fitting. His last task would be organizing the past, just as he'd spent years trying to organize his own memories of that fateful night. Later that day, Frank descended to the poorly lit basement, the air thick with dust and the particular stillness of forgotten things. Row upon row of metal shelving stretched through the cavernous space, loaded with cardboard boxes containing the hospital's paper history. Electronic records had replaced most of these files, but the older materials remained, tucked away like unwanted memories. Frank worked methodically, cataloging files from the period just before the hospital's records went digital. His mind wandered as his hands sorted through yellowed pages and faded ink. 3 hours into the task, his back aching from the repetitive movement, Frank noticed an unmarked box pushed against the wall behind a row of shelving. Something about its placement struck him as deliberate, as if it had been hidden, rather than simply forgotten. Curiosity piqued, Frank pulled the dusty box toward him. Inside were unlabeled VHS tapes, their cases cracked with age. A chill ran down his spine as he noticed the dates written in faded marker on the spines. One of them, partially damaged, its label smudged, bore the date of Emma and Olivia's disappearance. His hands trembled slightly as he carried the tape to the ancient VCR kept in the basement for viewing historical archives. The machine whirred to life reluctantly, accepting the tape with a mechanical groan. The screen flickered with static, then stabilized, showing a grainy view of the third-floor corridor, largely unused during night shifts. Frank leaned forward, his heart racing as two familiar figures in nursing uniforms appeared on screen. Emma and Olivia, their matching blonde hair pulled back in identical ponytails, walked side by side down the corridor. What made Frank's blood run cold was the hooded figure following several paces behind them. As the figure passed beneath one of the hallway lights, Frank quickly paused the tape and adjusted the contrast. Under the hood, clearly visible for just one frame, was the face of Dr. Robert Wilson. the hospital's respected chief of medicine who had left Lakeside weeks after the disappearance, citing a research opportunity abroad. "My God," Frank whispered, his fingers fumbling for his phone. He needed to call Madison, his daughter, now a detective with the local police department. This was evidence, actual evidence after 12 years of dead ends. The call went straight to voicemail. Madison was probably in a meeting or at a crime scene. Frank quickly made a digital copy of the relevant footage, transferring it to his laptop. This couldn't wait for official channels. He needed to show Jessica immediately before bringing it to the police. She deserved to know first. Frank's heart hammered against his ribs as he rode the elevator to the administrative floor. The polished hallway leading to Jessica's office felt miles long. At her door, he hesitated, his hand raised to knock. Was it right to reopen these wounds? Jessica had rebuilt her life, becoming the youngest administrative director in the hospital's history. Did he have the right to drag her back into this nightmare? But it wasn't just about Jessica's right to know. It was about Emma and Olivia's right to justice, whatever had happened to them. He knocked firmly. "Come in," called Jessica's measured voice. Frank entered her elegant office, so different from the utilitarian spaces in the rest of the hospital. Jessica looked up from her computer, her professional smile faltering slightly when she recognized him. "Frank, this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Jessica, I found something you need to see," Frank said, placing his laptop on her desk and bringing up the digital copy he'd made. "I was organizing the archives in the basement when I found this tape. It's from the night your sisters disappeared." Jessica's eyes widened, her carefully composed facade cracking as Frank played the footage. The color drained from her face as she watched her sisters walk down the corridor, followed by the hooded figure Frank had identified as Dr. Wilson. Her hands began to visibly tremble. "You knew?" Frank asked, observing her intense reaction. "I suspected," Jessica whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "But I had no proof. Dr. Wilson was my mentor, practically a father to me after our parents died. He became obsessed with my sisters, especially because they were identical twins. When they disappeared, he told me if I said anything, the same would happen to me." Before Frank could respond, the door to Jessica's office burst open. Carter, the head of security, entered with 2 guards in tow. "Mr. Miller, I need you to come with me," Carter said, his voice flat and authoritative. "We're investigating the disappearance of old files from the evidence room." Frank immediately understood. Someone had noticed his discovery. "Jessica, call Madison now," he said urgently as the guards moved toward him. As he was escorted from the office, Frank noticed a gray-haired man watching from the end of the hallway, Dr. Thomas Blackwood, Wilson's former best friend and current hospital board member. The man's expression was unreadable, but his intense focus on Frank sent another chill down his spine. In the corridor, Frank saw his opportunity when Carter turned to answer a call on his radio. Using the instincts from his earlier years as a police officer, Frank slipped away from the distracted guards and moved quickly through the corridors he knew like the back of his hand. He ducked into a supply closet, breathing heavily as footsteps raced past. With shaking hands, he sent a message to Madison with a photo of the evidence. If something happened to him, at least she would know what he'd discovered. When the corridor fell silent, Frank made his way toward an emergency exit at the back of the hospital. He pushed through the door into the afternoon sunlight, only to find Dr. Blackwood standing there, a surgical scalpel glinting in his hand. "You shouldn't have meddled in this, Frank," said Blackwood, his voice eerily calm. "Some things are better left in the past." The fight that followed was brief but violent. Despite being in his 60s, Frank still had the reflexes of a former cop. He managed to disarm Blackwood, but not before the doctor slashed a deep cut across his arm. Blood soaking through his sleeve, Frank staggered through the parking lot toward a police cruiser that had just pulled up. Madison had received his message. "Dad, what happened?" His daughter's concerned face appeared as she threw open the car door. "I found who took the twins," Frank said, handing over the drive with the footage. "And it seems it wasn't just Wilson. The hospital is covering up something much bigger." As they pulled away from the parking lot, Frank saw Jessica running toward them, pursued by Carter and his men. "Stop the car!" Frank shouted. Madison braked, allowing Jessica to climb into the back seat, breathless and frightened. "They wiped all the files from my computer," she gasped, "and I found this in my drawer." She held up an old ID badge belonging to one of her sisters, with a handwritten message on the back. "Brookhaven, 342. "What's Brookhaven?" Madison asked, accelerating away from the hospital. "Dr. Wilson's private estate outside town," Jessica replied as the car sped away. "But he died 3 years ago in a car accident. Or at least that's what we were led to believe," Frank said grimly, realizing they had just unearthed something far darker than they could have imagined. The abandoned Brookhaven estate loomed against the darkening sky, its once grand Victorian mansion now consumed by climbing ivy, transforming it into a skeletal remnant hidden within the surrounding forest. Madison parked her police cruiser several hundred yards away, concern etched across her face as she turned off the engine. "We can't just break in," she argued, her detective instincts taking precedence. "We need a warrant, proper backup. This is exactly how evidence gets thrown out of court." Frank pressed a handkerchief against the deep cut on his arm, wincing slightly as he applied pressure. "By the time we secure a warrant, they'll have cleaned out any evidence. The hospital administration already knows what we found. They'll contact whoever's watching this place." He looked at the mansion through the windshield. "Besides, technically I'm still a hospital employee investigating an unresolved incident." Jessica remained silent in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the distant mansion. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the tension in her jaw. "There's something else I never told anyone," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About a month after my sisters disappeared, I received an anonymous package containing locks of their hair and a note saying, 'They're safe in the dollhouse.' I thought it was cruelty, some sick joke." "Dollhouse?" Frank asked, turning to look at her. "Dr. Wilson collected Victorian dollhouses in miniature," Jessica explained, her eyes never leaving the mansion. "It was his hobby. He always joked that my sisters were perfect as dolls." A chill ran through Frank despite the warm evening air. Wilson's obsession seemed more twisted with each new revelation. Madison reluctantly agreed to investigate the property, after extracting promises that they would only look, not touch, and would call for backup if they found anything concrete. The three approached the estate cautiously, moving through the overgrown gardens toward the main building. The front door was locked, but a side window yielded easily to Madison's careful pressure, the latch long since rusted. The interior of the mansion was a monument to decaying opulence. Sheets covered furniture like ghosts haunting the rooms, and thick layers of dust and cobwebs draped across every surface. The air was stale, undisturbed for years. In the main hall, an entire wall was dedicated to Wilson's dollhouse collection. Dozens of intricate Victorian miniatures displayed elaborate rooms with tiny furniture and small dolls positioned in everyday scenes. Jessica approached them slowly, her breathing shallow and quick. "This is disturbing," Madison murmured, examining the houses. In one of them, 2 identical porcelain dolls dressed in nursing uniforms sat in a miniature living room, their painted faces frozen in pleasant smiles. Jessica choked back a cry. These dolls, they look like Emma and Olivia. As they continued exploring the first floor, Madison's phone rang, breaking the eerie silence. It was the police station. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she listened. "What? When?" She hung up, her face pale. "Blackwood's body was found in the hospital parking lot. Someone cut his throat with a scalpel. But he was alive when we left, Frank said, confusion evident in his voice. And now you're the prime suspect, Dad. Witnesses saw you fighting, and your blood was found at the scene. Frank felt the weight of the accusation settle on his shoulders. Someone's trying to frame me. We need to find proof here before the police arrive. The group moved upstairs, finding most rooms empty or filled with dust-covered furniture. At the end of the hall, they discovered a locked office. Madison, using her detective skills, managed to pick the lock. Inside, they found walls covered with photographs of the twins, at the hospital, on the street, in their apartments. Wilson's obsession ran deeper than any of them had imagined. "My God," whispered Madison, staring at the meticulous documentation of the twins' lives. A bookshelf revealed dozens of journals, carefully dated. Jessica began leafing through them, her face growing increasingly horrified with each page. "He watched them for months before the disappearance," she whispered. "And he wasn't alone. There are mentions of a circle of people who shared his obsession." Frank discovered a locked drawer in the desk. Forcing it open, he found a folder containing medical records for the twins and other young women. "Jesus," Frank exclaimed. He was conducting some kind of experiment, something related to the genetics of identical twins. A noise from downstairs made them all freeze. Slow, deliberate footsteps were climbing the stairs. Frank motioned for them to be silent as Madison drew her service weapon. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. The doorknob turned slowly. The door swung open, revealing Carter, the hospital's head of security, holding a gun. "Knew you'd come here," he said calmly. "Dr. Wilson always said you wouldn't give up, Frank, even after all these years." "Where are the twins?" Jessica demanded, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Ask your mentor," Carter replied with a cruel smile. "Oh, wait, you can't. I had to silence him today, just like I did with Dr. Wilson 3 years ago." Madison aimed her weapon at Carter. "You're under arrest for homicide and accessory to kidnapping." Carter's laugh echoed through the room. "You think I'm alone in this? Half the hospital's board is part of the circle. We're connoisseurs of perfection." What followed was a violent confrontation as Frank lunged at Carter, trying to protect his daughter. The gun discharged, hitting a bookshelf. Books and papers flew through the air as the two men struggled. Madison managed to disarm Carter, but he pulled a knife from an ankle holster. During the fight, Jessica found something in the journals, a reference to a secret basement beneath the property. "The True Dollhouse," the entry read. Carter, seeing Jessica with the journal, became visibly disturbed. "You can't go down there, nobody can!" With a desperate move, he attacked Jessica, but Frank intercepted the blow, receiving a deep cut across his chest. Madison reacted instantly, striking Carter's head with the butt of her gun, knocking him unconscious. Bleeding heavily, Frank fell to his knees. "Need to see the basement," he mumbled. Jessica found the hidden lever mentioned in the journal, a bookshelf that revealed a spiral staircase descending into darkness. With Madison supporting her injured father, they slowly made their way down. What they found below defied sanity, a perfect replica of a hospital ward, complete with medical equipment, beds, and most disturbingly, mannequins with the faces of various young women, including the twins. "This is sick," whispered Madison, her professional composure cracking at the sight. Jessica approached a table with medical charts. "They didn't just keep them here. They were using them for some kind of cloning experiment." Frank, growing weaker from blood loss, noticed something the others missed: fresh scratch marks on the door leading out of the basement. "Someone was here recently," he managed to say before collapsing. The distant sound of sirens announced the arrival of police as Madison desperately tried to stem her father's bleeding. "Stay with me, Dad," she pleaded, pressing her jacket against his wound. "Help is coming." Jessica stood frozen between helping Frank and examining the horrifying evidence of what had happened to her sisters. The mannequins stared back with vacant eyes, each bearing an uncanny resemblance to young women. Some she recognized from missing persons cases over the years, others complete strangers, and two that, despite alterations, were unmistakably Emma and Olivia. They were practicing, she whispered, understanding dawning on her face. These aren't just mannequins, they're surgical models. Madison looked up from Frank, confusion mixing with horror. What do you mean? Face transplants, genetic modification. Jessica ran her fingers over the cold plastic features of one model. Wilson was obsessed with perfection, with identical twins. These models showed different stages of transformation. The wailing sirens grew louder as police cars pulled up to the mansion. Madison called out, directing her colleagues to their location while continuing to apply pressure to Frank's wound. As medical personnel rushed down the spiral staircase, the full impact of their discovery began to sink in. Frank, drifting in and out of consciousness, reached for Jessica's hand. "Not your fault," he mumbled. "Never was." As paramedics lifted Frank onto a stretcher, Jessica noticed something near where he had collapsed. Fresh marks on the basement door, indicating someone had clawed their way out. Not in, but out. She touched the scratches, feeling their sharpness. "These are recent," she told Madison, as they followed the stretcher up the stairs. "Very recent." The sterile scent of antiseptic filled Frank's nostrils as he drifted in and out of consciousness in the hospital room. His eyelids fluttered open to find Madison sitting vigilantly by his bedside, her service weapon visible beneath her jacket, eyes constantly scanning the room with professional wariness. The surgery to repair the deep laceration across his chest had been successful, but he remained weak, his skin pale against the white hospital sheets. "You're not letting any of the staff near me, are you?" Frank whispered, his voice rough from the intubation tube they'd removed earlier. Madison shook her head, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "Who knows how many of them might be part of this circle? I'm not taking any chances with your life, Dad." The door opened cautiously and Jessica entered, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to Madison before settling into the chair on the opposite side of Frank's bed. "The police have Carter in custody, but he's refusing to talk without immunity," she reported, her voice low. "They're analyzing the diaries and documents we found at the mansion." Frank struggled to sit up slightly, grimacing at the pull of stitches across his chest. "What did they find about the twins?" Madison consulted her notes. "The conspiracy goes back decades. Prominent doctors conducting unauthorized experiments on twin patients, particularly young women." She looked up at Jessica. "The records show your sisters had a rare genetic mutation that apparently made their genes particularly stable for cloning and genetic manipulation. Dr. Wilson was obsessed with creating perfected humans." "The mannequins," Frank murmured suddenly, drawing both women's attention. Jessica leaned closer. "What about them, Frank?" "Not mannequins," he said with effort, each word draining his limited energy. "They were molds. For facial surgeries, they were changing someone's appearance." Before either woman could respond, a detective entered the room, interrupting their conversation. "Detective Miller? We found something else at the property you should see." He handed an envelope to Madison. Inside were photographs, recent ones, of 2 identical women, but with different hair and facial features than the Reynolds twins, walking on an unfamiliar beach. "The most interesting part," continued the detective, "is that these photos were taken just 3 months ago." Jessica took the photos with trembling hands. They could be alive, after all this time. "There's more," said the detective. "We found a hidden safe with fake passports and documentation for at least 12 different identities, including 4 that could be used by the twins." A spark of hope ignited in Frank's eyes. For the first time in 12 years, there was tangible possibility that Emma And Olivia might still be alive. As Madison stepped out to confer with other investigators, Frank observed Jessica examining the photographs with meticulous attention. "There's something odd about these images," she murmured, more to herself than to Frank. Frank tried to sit up, ignoring the pain. "What is it?" "Emma had a small scar on her right eyebrow since childhood, and this woman has it too." Jessica pointed to an almost imperceptible detail in the photo. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Dr. Sarah Lehman, chief of the surgical team and a member of the administrative board, entered. Her immaculate white coat and professional demeanor seemed incongruous with the tension filling the room. "Mr. Miller, how are you feeling?" she asked with a practiced smile, checking his chart at the foot of the bed. Frank and Jessica exchanged apprehensive glances. "Better, doctor," Frank answered cautiously, noticing the physician's gaze fixed on the photographs spread across his bed. "Interesting, aren't they?" said Dr. Lehman, picking up one of the photos. "They succeeded, after all." Jessica's blood ran cold. Succeeded at what? The doctor smiled in a disturbing way. Escaping, of course. Emma was always the smarter of the two. She figured out how to disarm the security system after Wilson died. Frank tried to reach for the emergency call button, but Dr. Lehman moved faster, injecting something into his IV line. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "I'm not going to kill you. That would be too obvious. This will just make you confused. As for memories of this conversation, well, no one will believe a man under the influence of heavy painkillers." Jessica stood to confront the doctor, but Lehman pulled a syringe from her lab coat pocket. "Sit down, Jessica," she ordered, "or I'll finish what I started with your security guard." "You were part of this all along," Jessica accused, slowly sitting back down. "All this time working alongside me." "Watching you," Lehman corrected. "We needed to ensure you wouldn't discover anything. Wilson was careless, too obsessed. The Circle has goals beyond his fixation with your sisters." Frank struggled against whatever was being injected into his system. "Where are they?" The doctor shrugged. "Who knows, probably South America or Europe. Emma was brilliant. She appropriated our methods to change their identities. Last time we tracked them was in Argentina, but that was a year ago." "Why?" asked Jessica, tears in her eyes. "Why my sisters?" "Your genetic lineage is exceptional," Lehman replied, a gleam of fascination in her eyes. "The potential for longevity, disease resistance. Wilson may have been a lunatic, but he was right about one thing. Your sisters were the key to our advancements in regenerative medicine." Frank felt his consciousness slipping away, but managed to grab the doctor's wrist when she leaned over to adjust his IV. With a sudden jerk, he ripped the needle from his arm. "Jessica, run!" he managed to say before Lehman struck him on the head with a metal chart holder. Jessica lunged at the doctor, knocking her backward. The two women fought furiously, overturning equipment and furniture. Lehman, larger and stronger, managed to subdue Jessica, pressing the syringe against her neck. "You could have been part of this," she hissed. "Wilson always said you had the same potential as your sisters." Just as the needle was about to penetrate Jessica's skin, the door burst open violently. Madison entered, accompanied by several police officers. "Get away from her," Madison ordered, weapon aimed. Lehman, seeing herself cornered, used Jessica as a human shield. "You don't understand. What we're doing will save millions in the future. A few lives are a small price to pay." "Those lives weren't yours to take," Madison replied, maintaining steady aim. In a desperate move, Lehman shoved Jessica toward Madison and ran for the window. Without hesitation, she hurled herself through the glass. The sound of shattering glass was followed by screams from the parking lot below. Madison rushed to the window, only to see Lehman's motionless body on the asphalt 6 floors below, surrounded by shocked onlookers. The following days passed in a blur of police statements, media coverage, and hospital security overhauls. With Lehman dead and Carter negotiating immunity in exchange for names, the Circle's conspiracy began to unravel. Dozens of doctors and hospital administrators across the country were implicated, revealing a network of unethical experiments spanning decades. But of the Reynolds twins, no concrete sign emerged. Only fragmentary clues of passports used at various international airports, always disappearing before they could be located. 4 days after the incident with Lehman, Frank was finally strong enough to sit up in bed without assistance. Jessica had brought him the case files Madison had compiled, and they spread them across his bed, searching for patterns in the twins' movements. Buenos Aires, then Santiago, then Lima, Frank muttered, marking locations on a map. Then nothing for 3 months until Bangkok. Jessica nodded, studying the timeline. Then Zurich 2 months later, always staying ahead of anyone who might be looking for them. Frank felt a mixture of hope and desolation. They might truly be alive, but they were clearly determined not to be found. "What if they don't want to be found?" he asked Jessica, looking up from the maps. "After everything they've been through?" Jessica paused, considering the possibility for the first time. "Then I'll respect their choice. But I need to at least try. Need them to know they can come home." Madison entered the room with a grave expression. "I just got a call. They found Wilson's body." "What?" Frank exclaimed. "I thought he died 3 years ago." "Apparently not," Madison replied. "The body found in the car accident was misidentified. The real Wilson was found buried on the Brookhaven property grounds. From decomposition, he was killed approximately 3 years ago." Jessica frowned. But if Wilson was dead all this time, then who was directing the experiments? Frank completed, feeling a chill run down his spine. Madison placed a file on the bed. "The fingerprints on the most recent journal found in the mansion aren't Wilson's. They belong to someone else we know well." She opened the file, revealing a photo of an elegant middle-aged man. Frank felt his heart momentarily stop. "Peter Collins," he whispered. "The current hospital director," Madison confirmed, "and Jessica's fiancé." Jessica stared at the photograph of Peter, her fingers trembling as they traced the outlines of his familiar face. The man she had planned to marry, the man who had comforted her through the ongoing grief of losing her sisters, was now revealed as potentially complicit in their disappearance. She felt the room spinning around her, the foundations of her reconstructed life crumbling in an instant. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "There must be some mistake." Madison placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The fingerprint match is definitive, Jessica. They're all over the most recent journals, entries dated months after Wilson's confirmed death." Frank struggled to sit upright, ignoring the pain radiating across his chest. "Jessica, I know this is devastating, but we can use this. Peter doesn't know that we've made this connection." Jessica's expression shifted from shock to a cold determination. "You want me to be bait?" she stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Over the next 24 hours, they formulated a plan. Jessica would meet Peter at the upscale restaurant where he had proposed to her 6 months earlier. She would wear a concealed microphone, with Madison and a tactical team monitoring from vans parked nearby. Frank, against medical advice, insisted on being in one of the surveillance vehicles. "You nearly died 4 days ago," Madison had protested. "I've spent 12 years carrying the guilt of those girls' disappearance," Frank replied firmly. "I'm not sitting this out." The evening of the operation arrived with tense anticipation. Jessica sat across from Peter at their usual table by the window, the overhead lighting reflecting off the polished silverware between them. He had arrived punctually as always, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, his silver-streaked hair perfectly styled. To any observer, they appeared to be nothing more than an elegant couple enjoying a sophisticated dinner. "You seem tense," Peter observed, his customary charm intact as he poured wine for both of them. Is it because of all that unpleasantness at the hospital? I'm sorry it's affected your work so profoundly. Jessica forced a smile, conscious of the microphone taped beneath her collar. Actually, I'm concerned about some photographs we found at Dr. Wilson's property. Peter's hand hesitated momentarily as he raised his glass, an almost imperceptible tremor. Photographs of my sisters. Recent ones. The silence that followed was calculated. Peter took a long sip of wine before responding. Jessica, your sisters disappeared 12 years ago. Any recent photos would be a cruel forgery. One of the women had Emma's distinctive scar on her eyebrow. Jessica continued, studying every micro-expression crossing Peter's face. And Olivia always had that peculiar way of tilting her head in photos, details that only someone who knew them intimately would notice. Peter carefully placed his glass on the table. What exactly are you implying, darling? That you know where they are, Jessica responded directly. That you're not who you claim to be. A cold smile replaced Peter's rehearsed charm. Wilson was right about you. As intelligent as your sisters, just less cooperative. So you're not going to deny it? Why deny something that soon won't matter? Peter consulted his watch. The sedative in your wine should be taking effect. Light, but sufficient for a tragic accident on your way home. Jessica felt the room spin slightly. You're not Peter Collins, are you? You never were. Peter Collins died 5 years ago. I needed a new identity, and he had the perfect credentials. He leaned forward. Do you know why your sisters were so valuable to us? They had a genetic mutation that allowed perfect integration of transplanted tissues. No rejection. The holy grail of medicine. Wilson? Jessica whispered, finally recognizing the truth. You're Wilson. Facial surgery is a wonderful thing, isn't it? He touched his own face. Especially when you have first-rate genetic material to accelerate healing. Jessica attempted to stand, but her legs failed her. Before she could fall, 2 plainclothes officers posing as restaurant patrons intervened, grabbing Peter by the arms. Dr. Robert Wilson, you're under arrest, announced Madison, emerging from a nearby table. Wilson laughed softly. You really think I'm alone here? At an almost imperceptible nod of his head, 3 other restaurant patrons rose, drawing weapons. Chaos erupted immediately. Wilson took advantage of the confusion to escape through the kitchen while Madison shielded her sister. Frank, who was supposed to remain in the surveillance van, limped into the restaurant at the sound of the first shots. He's escaping through the back, shouted an injured officer. Frank, ignoring the searing pain in his still-healing chest, followed through the kitchen to the dark alley beyond. He saw Wilson's silhouette running toward a parked car. Wilson, Frank shouted, making the doctor turn. The man who was once his friend, now wearing a different face, smiled coldly. Frank, always the hero, even when it's too late. Where are the twins? Frank demanded, cautiously approaching. Dead, alive, does it matter? They served their purpose. Wilson drew a gun. Just as you've served yours. The security guard haunted by guilt, seeking redemption. Pathetic. Before Wilson could fire, a figure emerged from the shadows behind him, striking his head forcefully. The doctor fell forward, revealing Jessica holding a fire extinguisher. That's for my sisters, she said, breathless. Wilson, still conscious, began laughing as blood trickled from his head. You think this is over? The circle has branches you can't imagine. Rulers, businessmen, people who shape the world with our advancements. Frank approached, kneeling beside the fallen man. Where are the twins, Robert? Last chance. Wilson's smile faltered for the first time. They escaped 2 years ago. Used my own knowledge against me, changed their faces. They're out there somewhere, knowing everything about us. That's my legacy, Frank. I perfected them, and now they're better than all of us. Sirens approached as Madison and other officers reached the alley. Wilson was handcuffed and taken away under heavy guard, his mocking laughter echoing through the night. In the weeks that followed, the investigation revealed the true extent of the Circle, an international cabal of scientists conducting forbidden experiments in human genetics. Arrests extended across multiple countries, dismantling much of the organization. Frank, recovering at home, obsessively reviewed case files. Jessica visited daily, both united by a shared obsession, finding Emma and Olivia. "Found something," Madison said one afternoon, spreading documents across the coffee table. Flight records to Geneva, Switzerland, for 2 women using identities matching those we found at the property. This was just 3 weeks ago. Jessica examined the documents. "You think it's them?" "There's more," Madison continued. "The most advanced genetic research clinic in Europe is in Geneva. 2 days after these women arrived, the clinic suffered a massive digital breach. All their research data erased." Frank smiled slightly. "They're not just running. They're fighting back." A month later, at Frank's official retirement ceremony at the hospital, now under new administration following the scandal, Madison handed him an envelope that had arrived that morning. No return address, just Frank's name written in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside was a recent photograph of 2 smiling women on a tropical beach, unrecognizable as the Reynolds twins he had known. On the back, a simple message. "Thank you for never giving up. We're safe. Don't look for us." Frank passed the photo to Jessica, whose hands trembled as she read the message. Her tears fell on the photograph as she traced the outlines of the women's faces. "It's really them," she whispered. "I can tell, even with different faces." "What will you do now?" Frank asked softly. Jessica wiped her tears, a complicated mixture of emotions crossing her face. "Respect their wishes, I suppose. For now." She looked up at Frank. "But what about you? The case is solved. The burden you've carried for 12 years. Frank looked at the photograph again, at the 2 smiling women who had endured unimaginable horrors, yet somehow survived. "I don't think this story is over yet," he said. "The Circle isn't completely dismantled. Wilson hinted at powerful people still out there." "Dad, you're retired," Madison reminded him gently. "Let the authorities handle this." "I am retired," Frank agreed, "which means I have plenty of time to keep digging." That evening, as Frank organized his case notes at his kitchen table, his phone chimed with a notification. An email from an encrypted address contained only a string of numbers. Coordinates. He entered them into a mapping program and felt his heart rate increase. The location was a small cafe in Geneva, Switzerland. Below the coordinates was a date, exactly 1 week from today. Frank stared at the screen for a long moment before picking up his phone to call Jessica. "Pack a bag," he said when she answered. "We're going to Switzerland." Frank's hands trembled slightly as he held the photograph, studying the unfamiliar faces that somehow still belonged to Emma and Olivia Reynolds. The message on the back, "Thank you for never giving up. We're safe. Don't look for us," felt both like closure and an opening. After 12 years of searching, they had confirmation the twins were alive, yet the directive not to pursue them created a new kind of tension. "We need to analyze every detail of this photo," Frank said, carefully placing the photograph on his kitchen table, where Madison had set up basic forensic equipment borrowed from the department. Madison adjusted the specialized light, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. "The paper is high quality, recent manufacture. Judging by the postmark, it was sent 3 days ago from a coastal town in Spain, but that could just be a diversion." Jessica leaned closer, pointing to a barely visible detail in the background of the beach scene. "There, behind them. That newspaper, it's French." She traced the outline with a magnifying glass. I can make out part of the headline. Something about the Geneva Genetic Institute. Frank's pulse quickened. The coordinates we received point to Geneva. This can't be coincidence. He tapped the newspaper in the photo. They're leaving breadcrumbs directing us there while officially telling us not to follow. It's a test, Jessica whispered, to see if we understand, to see if we're worthy of finding them. 3 days later, Frank, Jessica, and Madison stood in the departures terminal of the international airport, passports in hand. Frank had insisted on purchasing the tickets with cash through a travel agent rather than online, concerned about digital surveillance from remaining Circle members. Are we being paranoid? Madison asked, scanning the crowded terminal with practiced eyes. Frank adjusted the sling supporting his still-healing shoulder. After what we've uncovered, I'd say we're being appropriately cautious. The Circle infiltrated one of the country's most respected hospitals for decades. Their reach could extend anywhere. The flight to Geneva was tense, but uneventful. As the plane began its descent over the pristine Swiss landscape, Frank couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into a trap or genuinely getting closer to the twins. Either way, there was no turning back now. After checking into a modest hotel under assumed names, Madison used her law enforcement credentials to arrange a meeting with Captain Rousseau of Geneva's Cybercrime Division. The modernist police headquarters overlooked Lake Geneva, its glass facade reflecting the snow-capped Alps in the distance. The breach at the Genetic Institute was unlike anything we've seen, explained Rousseau, a sharp-featured woman with prematurely gray hair. Not a typical hack seeking financial data or patient records. The intruders specifically targeted and erased all files related to something called Project Mirror, while leaving everything else untouched. Was anything stolen? Madison asked. That's the peculiar thing, Rousseau replied, sliding a tablet across the desk. They didn't steal the data. They corrupted it beyond recovery, but only after spending several hours reviewing it. It was precise, surgical, like they were looking for specific information before ensuring no one else could access it. Frank studied the security footage Rousseau played. The cameras had captured nothing except brief glitches, moments of static that might indicate someone with intimate knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities. Do you have any leads on who was responsible? Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Nothing concrete, Rousseau admitted. But interestingly, 2 visiting researchers left the country immediately after the breach. Their credentials checked out initially, but deeper investigation revealed inconsistencies. By the time we identified them as persons of interest, they had vanished. The following morning, the trio made their way to the Geneva Genetic Institute, a sleek, ultra-modern complex nestled against the foothills surrounding the city. They had fabricated a cover story about consulting for an American hospital reviewing security protocols after similar breaches. Security has been significantly enhanced since the incident, explained the receptionist, eyeing their visitor badges with suspicion. Dr. Mercier will meet you shortly to discuss our new measures. As they waited in the sterile lobby, Jessica tensed suddenly, her gaze fixed on a middle-aged woman in a lab coat walking briskly across the atrium. The woman glanced their way, her eyes lingering on Jessica a moment too long before disappearing down a corridor. That woman was staring at me, Jessica whispered. Frank followed her gaze. Who is she? I don't know, but she seemed familiar somehow. Not her face, but something about the way she moved. When Dr. Mercier finally arrived to give them a carefully circumscribed tour, Frank noticed the heightened security presence. Guards at every junction, biometric scanners at each doorway, and cameras covering every angle. Whatever had been stolen or destroyed, the Institute was determined it wouldn't happen again. As they concluded the tour, Frank spotted the woman Jessica had noticed earlier, now sitting alone in the Institute's cafe. Making a split-second decision, he excused himself to use the restroom and instead made his way to the cafe. The woman saw him approaching and didn't seem surprised. Without looking up from her coffee, she slid a small card across the table as Frank passed. He palmed it smoothly and continued to the restroom, only examining it once he was alone in a stall. The card contained a simple message: Parc des Bastions, 9 p.m. Come alone. That evening, despite Madison's vehement protests, Frank insisted on attending the meeting alone. If it's a trap, there's no reason for all of us to walk into it, he argued. If it's genuine, my presence alone will seem less threatening. The historic Parc des Bastions was nearly deserted at night, its famous Reformation wall illuminated against the darkness. Frank sat on a bench near the giant chessboards, his hand resting near the small canister of pepper spray Madison had insisted he carry. You're punctual. Good. The woman from the Institute emerged from the shadows, her accent faintly French, but with undertones of something else. My name is Dr. Isabelle Laurent. I believe we have mutual acquaintances. Emma and Olivia Reynolds, Frank stated, watching her reaction carefully. Isabelle nodded. I worked with two brilliant researchers who joined our team 3 weeks ago. Officially, they were Dr. Sofia Mendez and Dr. Elena Kovac, with impeccable credentials from prestigious institutions. Unofficially, she trailed off, glancing around the park. You believe they were the Reynolds twins? Frank finished for her. I know they were, Isabelle replied. I've been studying genetic markers of identical twins for 20 years. Despite their altered appearances, certain genetic signatures remain unchanged. She leaned closer. They were investigating Project Mirror, a highly classified program involving advanced cloning techniques using genetic material from identical twins. Why are you telling me this? Frank asked, still wary of a potential trap. Because I discovered something disturbing about the project, Isabelle said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It wasn't just about medical advancement. There were applications for identity manipulation, consciousness transfer, things that cross ethical boundaries no scientist should approach. The circle, Frank muttered. Isabelle's eyes widened. You know about them. Then you understand why I'm risking everything by talking to you. When your friends discovered the full scope of the project, they didn't just erase the data. They left behind code that would flag any attempt to restart the research. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a security access card. There's an area of the Institute not included in your tour today, a restricted wing where the real work happens. If you truly want to understand what they were fighting against, what they're still fighting against, you need to see it yourself. Why help us? Jessica asked, later that night as they gathered in Frank's hotel room, examining the access card under the desk lamp. She's afraid, Madison suggested. If the Circle realizes she's aware of their true agenda, she becomes a liability. Frank nodded solemnly. She's making a calculated gamble that we can expose the truth before they silence her. Using Isabelle's access card and forged credentials Madison had prepared, they returned to the Institute after midnight. The night shift was minimal, and they navigated through the quiet corridors following Isabelle's detailed instructions. The restricted area was hidden behind an unmarked door that appeared to lead to a maintenance room. Once inside, they discovered a sterile corridor leading to an elevator that required both the access card and a numeric code Isabelle had provided. The elevator descended far deeper than seemed plausible for a building of the Institute's apparent size. There must be an entire underground complex, Madison whispered, as the doors silently opened to a stark white corridor. Following the path, they came to a reinforced door discreetly hidden behind medical equipment storage. Frank used the final code Isabelle had given them, and the door slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss. What lay beyond was a laboratory far more advanced than anything they had seen in the official facilities above. Cutting-edge genetic sequencing machines, cryogenic storage units, and equipment Frank couldn't begin to identify filled the space. But it was the central workstation that drew their attention, a horseshoe of high-resolution monitors surrounding a specialized surgical platform. This is where they were doing the real work, Jessica breathed, examining the equipment with horrified fascination. Not just theoretical research, but actual implementation. Madison accessed one of the computer terminals, finding it surprisingly unlocked. Either Isabel prepared this for us or were expected, Frank finished grimly. Before they could retreat, the central screen suddenly illuminated on its own, displaying a simple text message. "Welcome. We've been waiting for you." The security cameras mounted in the corners of the room swiveled in their directions simultaneously. Frank froze as the security cameras pivoted mechanically toward them, their red recording lights blinking in silent accusation. The message on the screen changed, letters appearing one by one as if someone were typing in real time. "Don't be afraid. It's us. Follow the lights." A sequence of LED floor lights suddenly illuminated, forming a pathway deeper into the complex. The three exchanged wary glances, their bodies tensed for a potential ambush. "This could be a trap," Madison whispered, her hand hovering near her concealed weapon. Jessica stared at the message, her expression shifting from fear to something like recognition. "Or it could be them," she said quietly. "Remember how Emma would always create scavenger hunts for us as children?" "Follow the lights," was her signature phrase. Frank nodded slowly, making his decision. We didn't come this far to turn back now. He took the first step forward, following the illuminated path that beckoned them deeper into the labyrinthine underground facility. The lights led them through a series of unmarked corridors until they reached a massive armored door that smoothly slid open as they approached. Beyond it lay a room lined with servers, their blinking lights creating a constellation of electronic stars in the dim space. Dozens of monitors covered the walls, initially dark and dormant. One by one, the screens flickered to life, each displaying different images that made Jessica gasp in horror. They showed Emma and Olivia during their years in captivity, clinical photographs documenting surgical procedures, genetic testing, and the twins connected to various monitoring equipment. The images progressed chronologically, showing subtle changes to their appearances over time, culminating in faces completely different from the nurses who had disappeared 12 years ago. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the systematic torture her sisters had endured. "Oh God," she whispered. "What they went through." A distorted voice suddenly emanated from hidden speakers, neither definitively male nor female. "You needed to see the truth, to understand what transformed us." Madison approached one of the terminals where files were spontaneously opening, revealing documentation of experiments conducted on dozens of other twins from around the world. "This is bigger than we imagined," she said, her professional demeanor cracking as she scrolled through the horrific evidence. "Some of these subjects are children." Frank discovered another monitor displaying personal files, including one about himself. "They've been monitoring me all these years," he murmured, scanning the detailed observations of his movements, his declining health, his persistent investigation. "They kept me at the hospital because they wanted to keep an eye on me." A soft, almost imperceptible alarm sounded, and a new message appeared on the central screen. "They've arrived. Second door on your left. Quickly." Without hesitation, the three darted through the indicated door, finding themselves in a small control room with surveillance feeds showing the laboratory they had just vacated. On the screens, they watched as a team of armed individuals in dark clothing systematically swept through the space, their movements disciplined and precise. "Circle security," Frank whispered. "They must have been alerted to our presence." One of the nearby monitors displayed a detailed map with a highlighted escape route through maintenance tunnels. The path blinked insistently, accompanied by a countdown timer showing they had less than 4 minutes before the search team would likely discover their location. Whoever's controlling these systems is giving us a way out, Madison observed, memorizing the route. Let's not waste it. They slipped into the narrow maintenance tunnel, which smelled of rust and damp concrete. The space was barely wide enough for them to move single file, with pipes running along the ceiling, forcing Frank to hunch uncomfortably. Jessica, bringing up the rear, noticed something caught on a pipe junction. A weathered black jacket that appeared to have been left deliberately. "Wait," she whispered, retrieving the garment. As she ran her hands over the material, she felt something stiff, sewn into the lining. Using a small pocket knife Madison provided, she carefully cut the stitches to reveal a thumb drive securely hidden within the fabric. Their progress through the tunnels was nerve-wracking, each distant sound amplified by the concrete surroundings. The path took them steadily upward, eventually reaching a service exit that emerged in a narrow alley behind the Institute complex. As they pushed through the rusted door to the outside world, they heard shouting from a distance, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness at the far end of the alley. "They've spotted us," Madison hissed, pulling her weapon. "We need transportation now." As if in answer to her statement, a black van suddenly turned into the alley from the opposite end, its headlights off. The side door slid open automatically as it pulled alongside them, revealing an empty interior with the engine running and the GPS already programmed with a route out of the city. "I don't like this," Madison muttered, even as they scrambled inside, bullets now, pinging off the brick wall where they had been standing moments before. Frank took the wheel, pulling away with a screech of tires as Madison returned fire through the rear windows, forcing their pursuers to take cover. The van accelerated through the deserted pre-dawn streets of Geneva, following the automated directions from the GPS. "Someone with considerable resources is helping us," Frank said, navigating a sharp turn as indicated. "The question is, why go to such elaborate lengths? Why not just contact us directly?" Jessica examined the thumb drive they'd recovered, noticing a small charging port on its side, unlike any standard USB device she'd seen before. "This isn't ordinary," she murmured. "It's custom technology." As the van reached the outskirts of Geneva, the immediate threat of pursuit seemed to diminish. The GPS directed them onto a mountain road that wound its way toward the French border. After 20 minutes of driving in tense silence, they reached a designated stopping point, a scenic overlook deserted at this early hour. The moment Frank parked the van, the vehicle's dashboard screen lit up with a message. "Connect the drive to the port beneath the screen." Jessica handed over the thumb drive, and Frank located the matching port camouflaged within the dashboard's design. Upon connection, the screen went blank momentarily before projecting a three-dimensional holographic image into the space between the front seats. The face of a woman materialized in the projection, someone who might be Emma or Olivia, but with features so altered that even Jessica struggled to identify which sister she might be looking at. The hologram smiled faintly, the expression somehow familiar despite the changed face. "If you're seeing this, you've successfully escaped the Institute," the holographic woman said, her voice carrying the same subtle cadence Jessica remembered from her sisters. "The drive you're holding contains everything we've gathered on the circles. Operations worldwide. Their facilities, their personnel, their experiments, and most importantly, their benefactors." The hologram shifted, displaying a global map with dozens of locations highlighted. "We've spent the last 2 years infiltrating their network, gathering evidence and preparing for what comes next. They took 12 years from us, years we can never recover. But they didn't break us. They made us stronger, faster, smarter than they ever intended." Another shift in the hologram revealed documents bearing the names of prominent politicians, business leaders, and medical pioneers, all connected through a web of financial transactions to Circle facilities. "The Circle isn't just a cabal of mad scientists," the hologram continued. "It's the research arm of an organization that has shaped global policy for decades, using human experimentation to advance technologies that ensure their control. What they did to us, to others like us, was just one project among many. Frank leaned forward, studying the familiar yet alien face in the light of dawn beginning to break over the mountains. "What exactly are you planning?" he asked, knowing she couldn't hear him but unable to contain the question. As if anticipating his query, the hologram smiled again. "You're wondering what our endgame is. Tomorrow, the International Conference on Genetic Innovation begins in Basel. Every major figure in the Circle's upper echelon will be there, believing themselves untouchable. They're wrong." The projection changed one final time, showing a complex schematic of the conference center where the event would take place. "The van will take you to Basel. Everything you need is in the compartment beneath the passenger seat. Credentials, equipment, and instructions. The Circle believes they're hunting you. In reality, you're our Trojan horse." The hologram flickered as the message concluded. "Find us in Basel. The final game begins tomorrow." The projection disappeared, leaving the three, staring at the empty space where it had been, the weight of what they'd learned settling heavily upon them. "They're planning something big," Madison said finally, breaking the silence. "Something beyond just exposing the Circle." Jessica retrieved the package from beneath the seat, containing new identities, conference credentials, and specialized electronic devices none of them recognized. "After what they endured, can we blame them for wanting more than just justice?" she asked quietly. Frank started the van again, following the GPS coordinates now pointing toward Basel. "The question isn't whether they deserve revenge," he said grimly. "It's whether what they're planning might hurt innocent people in the process." Inside the moving van, the thumb drive projected one more hologram onto the dashboard, the face of a woman who could be Emma or Olivia, now with altered features, saying, "Find us in Basel. The final game begins tomorrow." The van's automatic guidance system steered them along the highway toward Basel as Frank gripped the wheel, the holographic message from the twins still vivid in his mind. Dawn broke over the Swiss landscape, painting the Alpine foothills in gold and amber, while they processed the implications of what they'd discovered. "We should examine what's on this drive," Madison said, connecting the device to her laptop. "If we're walking into something tomorrow, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The screen filled with encrypted files, many of which appeared to need specialized decryption keys. One folder, however, opened immediately, containing a video diary labeled simply, "For Jessica." Madison passed the laptop to Jessica in the back seat, giving her privacy for what was clearly a personal message. Jessica's hands trembled as she pressed play. Emma's face appeared on screen, recognizable despite the changes to her features, by the small scar on her eyebrow that no surgeon had removed. "Jess," Emma began, her voice softer than in the automated message. "If you're watching this, you've followed the breadcrumbs we left. I always knew you would." She sighed, looking away from the camera momentarily. "I need to explain how we survived, what we became. You deserve to know everything." Emma described the early years of captivity, the terror, the confusion, the pain of countless procedures. "They kept us separated at first," she explained, "using our bond to control us. Cooperate or your sister suffers. The most effective leverage imaginable." Jessica wiped tears from her cheeks as Emma detailed how the twins were subjected to experimental treatments designed to enhance cellular regeneration. "The procedures had unexpected side effects," Emma continued. "Our cognitive functions began accelerating. Memory, pattern recognition, information processing. They were trying to perfect our bodies, but they enhanced our minds instead." Frank glanced in the rearview mirror at Jessica, her face illuminated by the screen's glow, pain etched across her features. The stolen years could never be returned, the trauma never fully erased. He returned his attention to the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The video shifted to show Olivia, her appearance similarly altered but still carrying the same familiar mannerisms that made Jessica's heart ache with recognition. While they thought they were monitoring us, we were studying them, Olivia explained, her voice harder than Emma's, carrying an edge of contained fury. Every security protocol, every computer system. We memorized keystrokes, passwords, floor plans. We became invisible observers within their own facility. Madison managed to decrypt another file, this one showing surveillance footage of the twins during what appeared to be an escape attempt 3 years earlier. "Look at this," she said quietly. "The way they move, how they coordinate without speaking, it's almost like they're communicating telepathically," Frank finished, watching as the twins executed complex maneuvers with military precision. "Not telepathy," Jessica said, still watching the video diary. "Emma's explaining it now. The treatments amplified their twin connection. They developed a form of micro-expression and subtle signaling that looks like telepathy to observers. They used it to plan right under their captors' noses." The videos continued, revealing how the twins had meticulously planned their escape over years, studying the same medical textbooks Wilson used to alter their appearances, learning surgical techniques, anesthesiology, and genetic manipulation. They became students of their own captivity, turning the Circle's weapons against them. By mid-morning, the van's GPS guided them into Basel, a picturesque city straddling the Rhine River. The vehicle automatically parked in an underground garage near the conference center, where the International Conference on Genetic Innovation would begin the following day. Event staff were already setting up security checkpoints and registration tables in preparation for the world's leading genetic researchers. "According to these credentials," Madison said, examining the documents from the package, "we're consultants from a U.S. medical technology firm. Our badges will grant us access to all the main conference areas." Frank pointed to the conference schedule displayed on a nearby digital board. "Look at the keynote speakers. The future of regenerative medicine. 3 of the 5 names match people identified in the Circle's documents." Jessica studied the preparations with growing concern. "The twins mentioned infiltrating a virus into the conference systems, but I don't understand what they're planning." She opened another encrypted file on the laptop, this one containing detailed schematics of the conference center's air handling systems. "This looks like specifications for releasing an airborne substance into the main auditorium," Frank said gravely, examining the diagrams. "The question is, what substance, and what will it do to the people exposed?" Madison's face paled as she realized the implications. "They're not just planning to expose the Circle, they're planning to mark them somehow, or worse." As they monitored the conference preparations from a cafe across the street, Jessica suddenly tensed, her coffee cup freezing halfway to her lips. "That woman," she whispered, nodding toward a slim figure in a tailored suit directing a team of technicians near the stage. "Look at her hands, the way she gestures." Frank observed carefully, noticing the distinctive way the woman emphasized points with a subtle rotating motion of her wrist, exactly how Olivia had always expressed herself when excited about a topic. "It's her," he murmured. "She's already in position." Madison continued working on decrypting the remaining files, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "I've accessed part of their plan," she said quietly. "They've developed a synthetic virus that targets specific DNA markers that would only be present in people who've been exposed to the Circle's experimental treatments." "A virus?" Frank asked sharply. "What kind of virus? What does it do?" "It's not lethal," Madison clarified, scanning the technical documentation. "It's a marker of some kind. Once infected, the subject's skin develops a distinctive pattern under ultraviolet light. Permanent, irremovable identification." Jessica understood immediately. They're going to brand them. Everyone who participated, everyone who benefited from human experimentation. They'll be marked for the rest of their lives. "That's elegant," Frank admitted reluctantly. "Poetic justice." "It's also assault," Madison countered, "no matter how justified it might seem. We can't let them do this." As evening approached, they checked into a hotel adjacent to the conference center, continuing to monitor the preparations. Frank discovered another hidden file containing building schematics with a detailed diagram of how the twins had modified the ventilation system to distribute their engineered virus throughout the main auditorium during the keynote addresses. "The release mechanism is already in place," he said grimly. "Set to activate remotely during tomorrow morning's session." Jessica stood by the window, watching conference attendees arriving at the welcome reception. "We need to talk to them before this happens. They've suffered horribly, but this crosses a line they can't uncross." As they debated their next move, Frank noticed several men in the hotel lobby who carried themselves with the same rigid posture and alert watchfulness as the security team that had pursued them in Geneva. "We've got company," he warned, moving away from the window. "Circle Security is here watching the hotel entrances." Before they could formulate a plan, Frank's phone chimed with an incoming text message from an unknown number. "Room 342. Come alone." The number struck him like a physical blow. 342, the same number inscribed on the badge that had started their journey, the same combination that had haunted his investigation for years. "It's them," he said, showing Jessica and Madison the message. "I need to go." "Absolutely not," Madison protested. "It's too dangerous. We stay together." "If I don't go, they'll disappear again," Frank argued. "This might be our only chance to convince them to find another way." "Let me go with you," Jessica pleaded. "They're my sisters." Frank shook his head. "The message specifically says alone. We need to follow their terms, at least initially." He checked his watch. "If I'm not back in 30 minutes, or if I don't text you that everything's okay, call in every law enforcement contact you have." As Frank made his way toward the elevator, his mind raced with possibilities. After 12 years of searching, he was about to face one or both of the Reynolds twins. The question was whether he would find the hopeful nursing students he'd lost, or the hardened survivors who had emerged from the Circle's brutal experimentation, women now planning a vengeful act that could harm countless people, guilty and innocent alike. While pressing the button for the third floor, Frank received another text. "Quarto 342. Venha sozinho." The same message, now in Portuguese. He realized it wasn't just a room number. It was a message within a message. The twins were testing if he would recognize the pattern, the same way they had tested him with breadcrumbs throughout this journey. Frank stood before the door of room 342, his heart hammering against his ribs as he recalled the number on the badge that had started this journey. His fingers traced the brass numerals, cool to the touch despite the warmth of the hotel corridor. This moment represented the culmination of 12 years of searching, of guilt, of wondering what had happened to the young nurses who had vanished during his watch. With a deep breath, he knocked firmly on the door. The seconds stretched into eternity before he heard a soft click of the lock disengaging. The door opened slightly, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. Inside, a woman stood with her back to the door, silhouetted against the window overlooking the illuminated conference center across the street. Her posture was achingly familiar, despite the different shape of her body. Shoulders squared, head tilted slightly to the left, in a gesture Frank had seen countless times in hospital corridors 12 years ago. "You can come in, Frank," she said without turning. "Close the door behind you." Frank stepped inside, letting the door click shut. The woman at the window finally turned, her face catching the soft lamplight. Her features were completely transformed. Higher cheekbones, different nose, fuller lips, but her eyes remained unmistakable, carrying the same intensity he remembered. The same intelligence that had made Emma Reynolds one of the most promising nursing students at Lakeside Memorial. A moment of profound silence stretched between them, neither knowing quite how to bridge 12 years of separation, trauma, and transformation. "You took longer than we expected," Emma finally said, a faint smile touching her lips. Frank remained by the door, uncertain whether to approach. "Emma?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded once. "What's left of her, at least?" She gestured to the chair opposite the one she took by the window. "Please sit. We have much to discuss and limited time." Frank settled into the indicated chair, studying the woman before him. "Your message said not to look for you, yet you've left us a trail of breadcrumbs from the beginning. Why?" Emma's altered face displayed a complex emotion, part pride, part sorrow. "We needed to know who we could trust, who would persist despite obstacles. The message was a test." She leaned forward, the light accentuating scars near her collarbone, partially hidden by her clothing. "You passed. What happened to you both?" Frank asked, his voice gentle. Emma rolled up her sleeve, revealing a network of surgical scars and what appeared to be implantation sites running from wrist to elbow. They wanted to perfect human regeneration. We were their favorite subjects because identical twins provided perfect control groups. Her voice remained clinical, detached, as though discussing someone else's suffering. Every procedure, every test, pushed the boundaries of what human tissue could endure. Frank struggled to maintain his composure as she detailed the progressive experiments, how Wilson had become obsessed with genetic manipulation, how the Circle had provided unlimited resources in exchange for breakthroughs. "The irony," Emma continued, "is that their procedures did enhance us, just not in ways they anticipated. Our neural pathways adapted. Our cognitive abilities accelerated. They created their own worst enemies while believing they were creating perfect subjects." Frank leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "Emma, I understand your desire for justice after what they did to you. But this airborne agent you're planning to release tomorrow is not what you think," Emma interrupted. "It's not lethal, not harmful. It contains a synthetic marker that binds permanently to a unique protein sequence the Circle introduces into their subjects and operatives. Under specific light, they'll be marked for life, branded as the monsters they are." "But there will be innocent people at that conference," Frank argued. "People who have nothing to do with the Circle." Emma's expression hardened. "The innocent won't be affected. The marker only binds to the Circle's proprietary protein signature. We engineered it ourselves based on what they put in us." Before Frank could respond, the door burst open. Jessica stood in the doorway, breathing heavily as though she'd run up the stairs rather than wait for the elevator. Her eyes locked on Emma, recognition and disbelief warring on her face. "I told Madison I was just going to check on you," she explained to Frank without looking away from her transformed sister. "But I couldn't wait." Emma froze, her carefully constructed composure cracking as she stared at the sister she hadn't seen in 12 years. Neither moved for a long moment, the air charged with unspoken emotion. Then Jessica crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped her arms around Emma, who remained rigid for a heartbeat before collapsing into her sister's embrace. Sobs racked Emma's body as the clinical detachment she'd maintained shattered completely. "I thought I was prepared," Emma whispered through tears. "I've imagined this moment 1,000 times." Jessica pulled back, cupping her sister's unfamiliar face in her hands. "I wouldn't have recognized you on the street, but I know you're in there. I can feel it." Frank watched their reunion with a lump in his throat, witnessing the first genuine emotion Emma had displayed since he entered the room. The moment felt sacred, a brief respite from the darkness that had engulfed them all. When they finally separated, Emma wiped her tears and regained her composure. "Olivia is already at the conference center, finalizing preparations," she explained. "We don't have much time. The Circle's security team is sweeping the hotel. They suspect we're here but haven't identified our exact location yet." "Emma," Jessica said urgently, "you need to reconsider this plan. Marking people without their consent, even people who've done horrible things." "They marked us permanently," Emma replied, her voice hardening again. "They altered our DNA, our faces, our lives. This isn't just about revenge. It's about making them visible. exposing them in ways they can't hide from with money or power. Frank stepped between them. There must be another way to expose the circle without crossing this line. Once you do this, there's no going back. Emma's expression softened slightly. The substance won't harm anyone physically. It's justice, not vengeance. Frank was about to respond when his phone vibrated with a message from Madison. "Security on your floor. Get out now." "We've been compromised," Frank said, showing them the message. "Circle security is on this floor." Emma moved with startling efficiency, gathering a small backpack and laptop. "There's a service corridor through the bathroom. It connects to the fire stairs." The sounds of heavy footsteps in the hallway spurred them into action. They slipped through the bathroom into a narrow maintenance passage, just as the door to room 342 burst open behind them. Frank heard gruff voices ordering a complete search of the premises. The service corridor was dimly lit and smelled of cleaning supplies. Emma led them with confident steps, navigating turns as if she had memorized the hotel's complete layout, which, Frank realized, she probably had. "Madison is in the parking garage," Frank whispered as they descended the fire stairs. "She has the van ready." They had nearly reached the ground floor when the door above them slammed open, voices echoing down the stairwell. 2 security personnel in dark clothing appeared on the landing above, spotting them immediately. "Run!" Frank shouted, pushing Jessica ahead as one of the men reached for a weapon. They burst through the exit door into the hotel's service area, where laundry and supplies were processed. Emma immediately veered between 2 large industrial washing machines, ducking behind them as a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off metal with a sharp ping. What followed was a chaotic chase through the hotel's back corridors. Emma demonstrated shocking physical abilities, disabling one pursuer with precise strikes to pressure points that left him crumpled on the floor, gasping for breath. Her movements were fluid, economical, nothing wasted. The result, Frank realized, of years of studying her captor's combat techniques. They finally emerged into the underground parking garage where Madison waited in the idling van, door already open. As they sprinted toward the vehicle, 2 more security personnel appeared from another entrance. "Get in!" Madison shouted, drawing her weapon and firing a warning shot that sent their pursuers diving for cover. Once inside, Madison accelerated up the ramp toward the street level, tires squealing on the concrete. "The conference center," Emma directed, her breath barely elevated despite the sprint. "We need to reach Olivia before she activates the system." Frank turned to her in surprise. "You're calling it off?" Emma's eyes met his. "Not calling it off, modifying it. There's another way, one that exposes without marking. It's what Olivia wanted originally, but I pushed for more permanent consequences." She looked at Jessica. "You were right. We can't become what they were." The van sped through nighttime Basel toward the brightly lit conference center, where Olivia was preparing to execute their original plan. The modern glass building loomed ahead, its lobby already filled with early arrivals for the gala reception preceding tomorrow's conference. Madison parked a block away, and Emma quickly outlined what they needed to do. "Olivia is in the mechanical room behind the main auditorium. She's finalizing the delivery system now. If we don't reach her in 15 minutes, the original plan proceeds automatically." As they approached the service entrance Emma had identified, Frank noticed she was communicating on her phone. "Letting Olivia know we're coming?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "No signal reaches the mechanical room. It's why we chose it. I'm alerting our other contingencies in case we're compromised." Using the forged credentials they'd been provided, they gained access to the service areas of the conference center. Emma moved with purpose through the labyrinthine back corridors, leading them toward the heart of the building where environmental systems were controlled. As they rounded the final corner to the mechanical room, they saw Olivia, similarly transformed but unmistakably the second Reynolds twin, finalizing adjustments on a tablet connected to the ventilation system. She looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Jessica. Emma and Frank ran toward the stage while Olivia initiated the final sequence on her tablet. In that same instant, the auditorium doors automatically locked shut and the ventilation system emitted a growing hum. Frank lunged forward, his body moving faster than his mind could process, driven by pure instinct and adrenaline. "Olivia, wait!" he shouted, his voice competing with the growing mechanical hum of the ventilation system. Emma sprinted alongside him, her transformed features set in determination as they raced toward the stage where her twin sister stood. Olivia's fingers hovered over the tablet's screen, her eyes darting between the approaching figures and the device in her hands. Recognition flashed across her face at the sight of Jessica, who had emerged from behind Frank, and in that moment of hesitation, Emma reached her sister. "We need to modify the plan," Emma said breathlessly, placing her hand over Olivia's on the tablet. "Not cancel, modify." A silent communication passed between the twins, a micro-expression exchange that spoke volumes, the result of their enhanced connection developed during their captivity. Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly, then widened in understanding. "Protocol Delta instead?" she asked, her voice carrying the same cadence as Emma's, despite her completely altered appearance. Emma nodded. "Full exposure, not marking. Jessica, help me see another way." Without further discussion, Olivia's fingers danced across the tablet, executing a complex sequence of commands. The rumbling ventilation system changed pitch, and throughout the auditorium, confused conference attendees looked upward at the ceiling vents. "What's happening?" Madison demanded, her hand instinctively moving toward her concealed weapon as she caught up to the group. "We're switching to our alternative protocol," Olivia explained, her eyes never leaving the tablet. "Instead of releasing the marking agent, we're deploying a harmless colored smoke while simultaneously—" The massive screens throughout the auditorium suddenly flashed, cutting off the corporate presentations and welcome messages. In their place appeared documents, photographs, and video footage, evidence of the Circle's experiments on unwilling subjects over decades. The horrific images showed surgical procedures, genetic testing, and human suffering on an industrial scale. "Broadcasting everything," Olivia finished, a grim satisfaction in her voice. Pandemonium erupted in the auditorium as attendees reacted to the shocking imagery displayed on every screen. Some rushed toward exits, only to find them temporarily locked by the twins' override protocol. Others stood transfixed by the evidence of atrocities, committed in the name of scientific advancement. A few individuals, those prominently featured in the exposed documents, began moving urgently toward side exits, their faces masks of panic. Jessica watched the chaos unfold, her emotions a tempest of vindication and horror. "They're all seeing it," she whispered. "The whole world is seeing what they did to you." Emma nodded, her expression solemn. "And what they did to dozens of others. Children, adults, all chosen for their genetic potential and disposability." On the main stage, one of the conference organizers attempted to restore order, tapping frantically at the podium controls to no effect. The screens continued their relentless display of evidence, each image accompanied by names, dates, and locations, meticulous documentation that could only have been compiled by someone with intimate knowledge of the Circle's operations. "We need to secure the exits," Madison said, her police training asserting itself as she assessed the situation. "Some of these people are going to try to escape rather than face justice." Frank pointed toward several distinguished-looking attendees making their way toward a service entrance. Those three were in the files, high-ranking Circle members. "They're already trying to slip away." Madison nodded grimly. "I alerted international authorities before we came in. There should be teams positioning outside all exits now." As if confirming her words, the distant sound of sirens grew louder, and through the glass walls of the conference center, they could see police vehicles arriving, their blue lights painting the night in staccato flashes. The three Reynolds sisters stood together on the stage, a tableau of justice 12 years in the making. Emma and Olivia flanking Jessica, their altered appearances belying the bond that connected them. Frank watched them with a swelling sense of pride and accomplishment, a weight lifting from his shoulders after carrying the burden of failure for so long. "It's over," he said, stepping toward them. "You did it. You exposed them." A sharp crack echoed through the auditorium, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot rising above the cacophony of confused voices and alarms. Frank saw a figure on the mezzanine level, an elderly man in an expensive suit, his face contorted with rage as he aimed a small handgun toward the stage. Without conscious thought, Frank threw himself forward, positioning his body between the twins and the shooter. A searing pain tore through his chest as the bullet found its mark, striking dangerously close to his previous wound. He stumbled, falling to his knees as screams erupted around him. Madison reacted with lightning speed, drawing her weapon and returning fire, forcing the shooter to take cover. Security personnel converged on the mezzanine, taking down the assailant with practiced efficiency. The auditorium descended into absolute chaos, people running in all directions, security teams attempting to establish control, and medical professionals rushing toward Frank's fallen form. Through the haze of pain, he was dimly aware of Jessica kneeling beside him, her face pale with shock. "Frank, stay with us," she pleaded, pressing her hands against his wound to stem the bleeding. Emma and Olivia immediately flanked him, their medical training taking over despite the years away from conventional practice. With precise movements, they examined the wound, their hands moving in perfect coordination. "The bullet missed the major arteries," Emma assessed clinically, though her voice carried an undercurrent of concern. "But he's losing blood rapidly." Olivia tore fabric from her jacket, fashioning a pressure bandage. "We need to stabilize him before transport. His previous injury compromised the tissue integrity in this area." Through the pain fogging his consciousness, Frank marveled at their expertise. The result of years studying medical techniques while in captivity, their knowledge extending far beyond their original nursing training. They worked with efficient precision, applying advanced trauma protocols that kept him from slipping into shock. Madison coordinated with the arriving emergency services, her badge giving her authority among the responding officers. "The shooter is secured," she reported, returning to Frank's side. "He's Dr. Heinrich Vogel, board member of 3 pharmaceutical companies and known circle financier." Jessica held Frank's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to be okay," she assured him, though her voice trembled. "I promise you, we won't let you go." Frank tried to speak, but could only manage a weak smile as paramedics arrived with a stretcher. The twins stepped back, allowing the professional medical team to take over, though they continued to monitor every action with critical eyes, occasionally offering guidance based on their specialized knowledge. As he was lifted onto the stretcher, Frank's gaze swept across the auditorium, where justice was finally unfolding. Police officers were placing several prominent attendees in handcuffs, while journalists who had been covering the conference were capturing every moment of the circle's exposure. The screens continued their relentless display of evidence, ensuring there could be no denying the atrocities committed. The momentary dimming of the auditorium lights during the commotion provided cover for several individuals to slip away in the confusion. Jessica noticed with alarm that some of the most senior circle members identified in the twins' files had vanished during the chaos. "They're getting away," she said, her voice tight with frustration as she watched the paramedics prepare to move Frank. Emma placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Not for long. We have contingencies in place. Know where they go will be safe from exposure now." As Frank was wheeled toward the exit where an ambulance waited, he felt a sense of completion despite the searing pain in his chest. The twins were alive, reunited with their sister, and the organization that had stolen 12 years of their lives was crumbling before their eyes. Jessica walked alongside the stretcher, refusing to let go of Frank's hand. "I'll be right with you," she promised. "It's my turn to watch over you now." The paramedics loaded Frank into the waiting ambulance, with Jessica climbing in beside him. As the doors began to close, he caught a final glimpse of Emma and Olivia standing together in the conference center entrance, their posture identical despite their altered appearances. Just before the doors shut completely, he saw Emma lean close to Olivia, whispering something that made her twin nod gravely before melting into the crowd. Jessica's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as she observed the exchange, a shadow of realization crossing her face. Despite the public exposure and the arrests taking place around them, she suddenly understood that her sister's vengeance was not yet complete. Light filtered through the window blinds of Frank's hospital room, casting warm stripes across the colorful array of flowers, greeting cards, and newspaper clippings that had transformed the sterile space into something almost homey. Frank's eyes fluttered open, his consciousness returning gradually as he registered the familiar beeping of medical monitors and the dull ache in his chest where the bullet had struck. Shifting slightly in the bed, he noticed Madison dozing in the chair beside him, her normally alert posture softened by exhaustion. On the small table next to her lay several international newspapers, their headlines proclaiming variations of the same stunning revelation. Global Medical Conspiracy Exposed and Decades of Illegal Human Experimentation Uncovered at Genetics Conference. Madison stirred at his movement, immediately snapping to alertness. "Welcome back," she said, relief evident in her tired smile. "The doctors say you're healing remarkably well, considering this is your second chest wound in a matter of weeks." Frank's voice was rough from disuse. "How long was I out?" 3 days, Madison replied, pouring him a cup of water. "The bullet missed your heart by centimeters but caused significant trauma. They had to remove it surgically." She gestured toward the newspapers. "While you've been recovering, the world's been experiencing quite the awakening." She handed him one of the papers, showing photographs of police escorting handcuffed dignitaries and medical professionals from the conference center. 32 arrests so far, across 12 countries. The evidence Emma and Olivia provided is irrefutable, detailed records going back decades, financial transactions, video documentation. The Circle's infrastructure is collapsing. Frank scanned the article, a sense of vindication washing over him. "And the twins, Jessica." Before Madison could answer, the door opened to reveal Jessica entering the room, accompanied by 2 women. Frank initially didn't recognize Emma and Olivia, with their transformed appearances, looking even more different in casual clothing than they had during the confrontation at the conference. "He's awake," Jessica said softly, her face lighting up with relief as she approached the bed. The 3 sisters moved as a unit, a family reconnected despite 12 years of separation and trauma. "We've been taking shifts," Emma explained, her clinical demeanor softening as she checked the monitors beside his bed with a professional eye. "Between coordinating with authorities and ensuring your recovery, we've hardly slept." Olivia stood slightly back, her posture more guarded than her sister's. "You took a bullet meant for us," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise, as though the concept of self-sacrifice remained foreign after years of experiencing only cruelty. "Why would you do that?" Frank considered her question, feeling the weight of 12 years of guilt and search behind his answer. "Because I failed you once. I wasn't going to fail again." Emma approached the bed, carefully taking his hand. "You need to understand something, Frank. What happened to us was never your fault. We planned everything about that night, including selecting your shift for our arranged disappearance." Frank's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Wilson had targeted us months earlier," Olivia continued, moving closer. "He approached us with a seemingly legitimate research opportunity, a chance to participate in a groundbreaking study on twin genetics. By the time we realized the true nature of his interest, we were already compromised. "We chose you," Emma said simply. "We reviewed the security staffing patterns and determined your shift would provide the best opportunity for a quiet exit. We never imagined what would happen after, how they would keep us, or what they would do to us." Frank felt a complex wave of emotions. Relief that he hadn't failed them through negligence, but a new kind of pain knowing they had trusted him indirectly all those years ago. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, taking his other hand. "No one could have stopped what happened, Frank, but you never gave up looking, even when everyone else did." Madison returned from the hallway carrying a small laptop. "The evidence package the twins compiled is extraordinary," she said, opening the device. "Not just about their own captivity, but dozens of other victims, experiments conducted across multiple continents, and political protection that reached the highest levels of government." Emma nodded, her expression somber. "We spent 2 years infiltrating their systems, gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when we could bring it all down. We became what they never intended, their own destruction, engineered through their experiments." On the laptop screen, Madison displayed a global map with dozens of locations highlighted: research facilities, private clinics, and remote compounds, all connected through the Circle's network. "Most of these have already been raided by authorities. The evidence is overwhelming." Frank studied the map, noting the reach of the conspiracy, far beyond what he'd imagined when this journey began. "And the people who escaped during the chaos at the conference?" The twins exchanged a glance that communicated volumes in microseconds. "They won't get far," Olivia said with quiet confidence. "We've established a network of our own. Other survivors, whistleblowers, journalists we trust. The Circle's leadership has nowhere to hide." A nurse entered to check Frank's vitals, and the conversation paused. After she left, Frank noticed the sisters had grown quiet, an unspoken tension hanging in the air. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked directly. Jessica hesitated before responding. "Emma and Olivia need to leave again, at least temporarily." "It's not safe for us to stay in one place too long," Emma explained. "Despite the Circle's exposure, there are still powerful individuals who would prefer we disappeared permanently. We know too much, and our very existence represents a threat to those who haven't yet been identified." Frank struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain in his chest. "But you just found each other again, after 12 years. "We've established secure communication protocols," Olivia interjected. "Jessica will always be able to reach us. But until every aspect of the Circle is fully dismantled, remaining visible puts everyone at risk." The reality of their situation hung heavy in the room. Despite the victories, despite the reunions, the shadow of the Circle still loomed over their lives. 3 weeks later, Frank stood in the hospital garden, his discharge papers finally signed. The spring sunshine warmed his face as he breathed fresh air for the first time in nearly a month. Jessica joined him, carrying the small bag containing his personal belongings. "How does it feel to be officially retired?" she asked, smiling as she helped him navigate the garden path. "Nothing like I imagined," Frank admitted. "I always thought I'd feel this sense of completion, of closing a chapter. Instead, it feels like a beginning," Jessica finished for him. They sat on a bench overlooking the carefully tended flowers. In the weeks since the conference, the world had changed dramatically. Daily news reports detailed new arrests, investigations into previously respected medical institutions, and a complete re-examination of genetic research protocols worldwide. Madison joined them, having just concluded a meeting with international investigators. "The federal prosecutor wants to formally recognize your contributions," she told Frank. "There's talk of a commendation ceremony." Frank waved away the suggestion. "I don't need recognition. Knowing the twins are alive, that they're free. That's enough." Jessica checked her phone. a habit she'd developed since establishing the secure communication system with her sisters. They've settled temporarily, somewhere safe. They won't tell me exactly where, for my protection as much as theirs. The three sat in companionable silence, watching hospital staff and patients enjoying the garden. The institution where they now recovered was a world away from Lakeside Memorial, with its buried secrets and shadowed corridors. "Have you decided what you'll do now?" Madison asked her father. "Mom's old beach house in Florida is still vacant. You could finally take that peaceful retirement you've talked about." Frank shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Peace is overrated. I've been thinking about consulting work, helping other families find missing loved ones. There's still so much to do." Jessica squeezed his hand. "And I've been offered a position heading a new ethics committee overseeing genetic research. A chance to rebuild the field with proper safeguards." As evening approached, they gathered for a small farewell dinner in Frank's honor. The hospital administration had arranged a private room, acknowledging the role he had played in exposing one of the greatest medical scandals in history. The celebration was intimate but heartfelt. Colleagues from Lakeside, those cleared of any involvement with the Circle, shared stories of Frank's dedication through the years. Madison spoke movingly of her father's unwavering commitment to finding the truth, no matter the personal cost. When it was Frank's turn to speak, he kept his words simple. 12 years ago, I made a promise to myself that I would find Emma and Olivia Reynolds. Today, I can say that promise was kept, but the work isn't finished. Not while others remain missing, not while any part of the Circle continues to operate from the shadows. As the gathering concluded, Frank received a small package, a parting gift from the hospital staff. Inside was a framed photograph of him with Jessica and Madison, taken during his recovery, with a simple inscription, "To New Beginnings." Later that night, in the quiet of his hospital room one final time, Frank's tablet chimed with an incoming message. The encryption protocols were complex, but he had memorized the sequence Emma had taught him. The message contained only a set of coordinates and a date 6 months in the future. 6 months later, Frank stood on the deck of a small beachfront cottage, watching the sunrise over tropical waters. His recovered strength had surprised his doctors, though the scars across his chest would remain with him forever, physical reminders of the journey that had led him here. A package had arrived the previous day, containing first-class air tickets to this remote location, and a simple note. Some shadows from the past deserve to be revisited in the sunlight.